Borderlines. We go beyond boundaries.
You know, let's be honest here. This is an organization that sent nearly 3,000 terrorists into Israel. And on the most part, they were proud. They don't care if they die. All they care about is killing Israelis and killing Jews.
Why is it that the Kenya cannot go by dialoguing with these people through other international bodies?
Straight talk. No holds barred.
That's what Hamas did. And Hamas say they didn't do it, but Hamas lied.
You contradict what America's report, you contradict Israel's report.
The Liberation Organization, the children will rise up tomorrow and fight for liberty.
Biggest conversations from around the world. Borderlines with Ireti Bakare-Yusuf. Fridays at 4 p.m. Let's talk.
And it's a good afternoon. Welcome to Borderlines, the only show that takes you beyond borders. My name is Ireti Bakare-Yusuf. Right, I have with me my guest. We're going to be talking about Syria, right? My guest is an expert, right? He's also a senior researcher, but more so for this purpose, he is the executive director of Afro Middle East Center. He specializes in geopolitics, the South African state, and Africa-Middle East relations with several published works. So you can see why it's so important, why we have such an important guest, a knowledgeable guest, such as Naeem Jeenah, who actually did an incredible webinar just in December, which I listened to. Hello, Naeem. Welcome to Borderlines. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much, and thank you for that very generous introduction.
Oh, well, it's only the truth. I didn't make anything up. No, but I did listen to your webinar in December. I think was it early December? I think it was about sort of 15th or something like that. Yeah. So I listened to it and it was really, really, really interesting. I know you had different guests and everything. So I have lots of questions for it, because I know that at the end they were trying to rush through the questions and stuff. And I thought to myself that, you know, my listeners would love to hear from you, would love to, you know, these questions that I'm about to ask you. So today we want to discuss the future of Syria. But before we go to that, give us like a sort of 3 minutes, you know, how should we say, history lesson reminder about Bashar Assad and his father, whose name I think is it Ahmed Hakim Assad?
Hafiz.
Thank you. Hafiz Assad. Just kind of, you know, sort of give us a 2-3 minutes history on that as a reminder, and then we'll get on with the rest of the show.
So Syria, after it got independence, had a number of governments. I'm not going to go through the details of that. A number of governments and a few coups. And the last one of those was in 1970, and that was a coup led by Bashar al-Assad's father, Hafiz al-Assad. Bashar al-Assad being the last president who was overthrown at the beginning of December 2024. Hafiz al-Assad took over with a group of military officers, in a sense built a new state that very much was built on fear. The role of the security forces, particularly the intelligence services, and the Syrian intelligence services became quite notorious for their repression, their surveillance, their spying. I mean, there's lots written, both fiction and non-fiction, about that era and about how, you know, even family members would be recruited to spy on each other, etc. Ruled Syria with kind of an iron fist. In 1980, we had the big massacre in the city of Hama, where, depending on whose estimates you take, between 20 and 40,000 people were killed. The city was essentially flattened by the security forces because there was an attempt at an uprising in that city. Syria also had a bit of a under Assad regional kind of footprint, and particularly was invited during the civil war in Lebanon. Was invited by, and the civil war in Lebanon was between essentially Muslims and Christians. Invited by the Christian Maronites in particular, in order to support them in the civil war. And that gave the Assad regime a kind of foothold in Lebanon, which it maintained for decades, and virtually treated Lebanon as a kind of as its governorate, if you like. Left Lebanon because it was forced to do so after the assassination of Lebanese Prime Minister Rafik Hariri in the 90s, and UN resolutions to that effect, and it then left. There was some suggestion that Syria was implicated in the assassination. That's not clear, but they left as a result. In 2000, Hafez al-Assad died, and his son became the president, and so it became a bit of a kind of dynastic thing. And in fact, it's interesting that the parliament changed the constitution in order to allow Bashar to become president, because there was an age limit, a minimum age in the constitution, and Bashar was just below that. So they changed the constitution to allow Assad's son Bashar to become the president, which he did, and he was president for 24 years. So between the two Assads, they ruled Syria for a total of 54 years. What we're seeing now after the coup, after he was removed in December, with number of revelations from various files, particularly intelligence files, people being released from these prisons. I mean, people who were jailed for 30, 40, 50 years, many of them Lebanese, many of them Palestinians, jailed and been released, and these files that are being revealed that showed the extent of the repression that took place under the two Assads and how they built up their state.
Excellent, thank you. Yeah.
Sorry, just one other thing is, we know that in 2011, we had, as part of this kind of uprising in the region, starting with Tunisia, Egypt, Syria, there was an uprising in the town of Daraa in the south by school children who were then tortured, beat up. The army went in to quell the protests, etc. And that led then into a civil war, which has been going on from 2011 until, essentially until now. And for a while, the country was split up. The Assad regime was supported in that by the Iranians, and from 2014 by the Russians as well, to maintain its state. But what we saw happening from the end of November, this kind of move by rebels from the north of the country down south towards the capital, very rapid move that then resulted in Bashar al-Assad leaving the country and it being taken over.
Brilliant. That takes me really smoothly to my next question. So the takeover of Aleppo, to most people, it seemed like it was, wow, very fast. But one of the things you said in your webinar was that no, it wasn't. This is something that's taken some 5 to 7 years. Can you please tell us about that? And also at the point where you said that HTS in that time were able to produce their own ammunition. Most people wouldn't have thought that. Most people wouldn't have known that. Please talk to us about that.
So just a word about HTS, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham. In a sense, started off as an Al-Qaeda affiliate, and then broke away from Al-Qaeda. ISIS wanted to take it over, prevented that from happening, broke away from Al-Qaeda, and then formed a coalition around 2016, 2017 with a number of other groups. Some of these groups had fought each other, these rebel groups. But 2017 formed this coalition called now Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, and since 2017 has been controlling a region in the northwest of the country called Idlib. And this is the issue. So there's been much focus on what's happening in Damascus, what's happening in the north and northeast with the Syrian Democratic Forces, the Kurdish group supported by the US. Very little attention on what was happening in Idlib. And perhaps that helped them. But what was happening was a few very important things. One is that there were a number of kind of political or diplomatic outreaches. So Hayat Tahrir al-Sham began engagements, for example, with the Kurdish Syrian Democratic Forces, the groups that are supported by the US. They opened up dialogue with the various tribal leaders in Idlib and around Idlib. They even more recently, like 2024, began some discussions with some commanders in the Syrian army. So there were all these kind of diplomatic maneuvers taking place, and that's kind of one level of what was happening. Secondly, that they set up a government which, by many accounts, seems to have actually been functioning for the past 7 or 8 years. It's called the Syrian Salvation Government. But it was collecting taxes, it was providing services, etc. And we're now seeing, after the takeover of Damascus, that many of the bureaucrats from Idlib that were there for the past 7 years have now been brought into Damascus because supposedly they have 7 years of experience and they can put that to good use. So that was the second layer, the building of a pseudo-state, if you like. A third layer was the military aspect, and there, on the one hand, there's this issue of them manufacturing some of their own weaponry, and we know that this is, it's less impossible than we think. I mean, in Gaza, where there's a genocide taking place, and that territory has been completely cut off from the rest of the world since 2007. They've manufactured drones and missiles and rockets and ammunition and sniper rifles, etc., all from things that they find locally. So certainly Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, which wasn't cut off from the rest of the world, they had a border with Turkey, they were manufacturing some of their, not all of it, I'm sure some of it was imported, but they were also manufacturing some of their own. But the other part of this military aspect is that they also set up a military academy. And were graduating military officers. So they professionalized what was a rebel group, they professionalized it into an army. And so when they moved into Aleppo and within 2 weeks were in the capital in Damascus, it was partly because they had a professional army with proper command and control, trained, motivated, and the opposing army, the Syrian National Army, was or the Syrian Arab Army, as it was called, was demotivated, mostly conscripts, and many of them not supporting the government's project. So that move into Aleppo wasn't as impossible as it might initially have sounded. And then the move, and then once they took over Aleppo, and it was clear that they were able to rout the army, they then decided to move southwards towards Damascus, and there was clearly coordination because when they moved, so all the way up to the outskirts of Damascus, it was Hayat Tahrir al-Sham and a few other groups. But the move into Damascus, when they got to the outskirts, the other groups from the south and the east moved in before they did. So that when they moved in, it wasn't, it didn't seem like the capital was being taken over by HTS, but by a number of different groups. So there was lots of that kind of coordination, clearly.
Interesting. Who is, because most of us really wouldn't have known him globally, certainly not in Africa, Abu Mohammed al-Jolani. Who is he? What's his background? we do know, yes, we've learned that he's used to be part of Al Qaeda. I believe he wasn't even born in Syria; was born somewhere else. So, who is it? What's his background, and why him? How did he become this suddenly very important man? And even more so, how did he become the head of the HTS?
So he is Syrian. He was born in Syria. He says that his family is from the Golan Heights, which is occupied by Israel and has been for decades now. Hence, he took the nom de guerre Jolani, meaning from the Golan, right?
Right.
But his name is Ahmed al-Sharra, which is the name he's now using now that he's no longer in the military fatigues. He's Syrian. His family lived in Damascus. And then were removed from the place where they were living and moved out by the regime at the time. He ended up in Iraq at some point and joined Al Qaeda in Iraq, and then was deployed by the Iraqi Al Qaeda into Syria after the civil war began there. To start an Al Qaeda branch in Syria, which he did, and called it Jabhatun Nusra. And he was the leader of Jabhatun Nusra. The Iraqi Al Qaeda then broke away from Al Qaeda and became ISIS, and insisted that this Syrian group now was part of ISIS, and Jolani refused. Fought against them and then remained as part of Al Qaeda, and then at some point that wasn't useful, I guess, for their own purposes, being part of Al Qaeda, and so broke away from Al Qaeda. And breaking away from Al Qaeda also helped to build relations with other rebel groups. So even now you have about 12 different rebel groups. But they were able to build those relations and then create this new kind of front called Hayat Tahrir al-Sham. He was probably the most experienced commander from all of the different groups,
right?
And that's why he became, was made the head of HTS. And now we seeing him much more, prominent.
Well, now he's international, it would seem. Right. He's removed the fatigue and he's talking to America. Let's talk about international actors. Who are the main international actors in this whole Syria, what you call imbroglio?
Yeah, so it's there's a number of them. Let me say who they are and why. So perhaps the first international actor that entered the scene was Iran. Iran has a long relationship with Syria. After the Iranian Revolution, when Iraq under Saddam Hussein declared war or went to war against Iran, Syria was actually the only Arab state that didn't support Iraq. And so the Iranians have been, in a sense, grateful to Syria for that. So when the civil war began and Bashar asked for assistance from Iran, they came in. They came in, provided advice, provided forces through the Revolutionary Guard Corps, etc., as well as brought in Hezbollah from Lebanon, which played a very important role in supporting Assad's forces. The additional factor about why for Iran Syria was and still is important is that Hezbollah in Lebanon, which is the main kind of force that has been opposing Israel, the main military force opposing Israel, gets most of its weaponry or much of its weaponry from Iran, and it comes through Syria. So Syria has been a conduit for that and therefore been very important. And for the Iranians and for Hezbollah, Syria falling would mean that conduit would be removed. So Iran and Hezbollah, the first kind of main foreign power. Then second, chronologically, the second one would be Turkey. Turkey, which borders Syria, Syria's northern neighbor, has a few interests in Syria. Number one, because it's a neighbor, it of course has interests in wanting whatever it might mean by stability, etc. But secondly, that there's a number of Kurdish groups, the Kurdish groups in Syria, which are aligned to, in Turkey, the Kurdish Workers' Party, the PKK. Which is a Marxist organization, and these groups, the YPG in Syria, aligned to them. And Turkey doesn't want to see a situation where the PKK-aligned groups, and Turkey regards the PKK as a terrorist organization, doesn't want to see groups aligned with the PKK to hold territory and to hold power in Syria. Just over a decade now, these Kurdish groups, calling themselves the Syrian Democratic Forces, have been holding territory in the north and northeast of Syria, bordering Turkey. And the only reason that Turkey has not gone to war with them is because, and this is one of the many paradoxes in this whole situation, these Marxist groups are supported heavily by the United States. The United States, through the SDF, kind of controls that area, and that area is where most of all of the oil reserves of Syria are located, and most of its gas. And that's the American interest. So they don't care that the people they're supporting are Marxists. They care that they're able to control the oil. So Turkey has been the second big power, and it has and continues to support some of the rebel groups, right. Both political opposition as well as military opposition. So this so-called Syrian National Army, which came into Damascus from the southeast, is supported by Turkey. The third, then the third one, of course, is the United States.
Yeah, which you spoke about. Yeah.
The United States supports the SDF. It also launched huge sanctions against the Assad regime in the past decade and a half, and has been in many ways not supporting, apart from these Kurdish groups, the SDF, not supporting the other groups, but in many ways has determined over the past decade and a half, has determined the flow of weaponry into Syria, from Jordan in particular, and played a very, very nefarious role in that regard. So, for example, when the rebel groups were making gains, they often used to tighten the supply of weapons. When the rebel groups were losing, they would open the supply of weapons. The idea being to maintain Syria in an unstable state, so that no one side would win. Then the fourth one is Russia. Russia came in 2014 ostensibly in order to fight against ISIS. But we saw initially the first couple of months, they essentially came in and started bombing various rebel positions in order to ensure that different rebel groups won't make gains towards the capital and towards areas held by the army. It was only after, I think, about 2 months that they then started attacking ISIS. Russia's interests, there's a few. One, and perhaps the most important one.
We may not be able to go into all of them because of time, but go ahead.
Yes. Okay. So very, very quickly, Syria represents for Russia its westmost sphere of influence. Secondly, it had a naval repair base, which has now been upgraded to a full-on naval base. It's Russia's only warm water naval base, and its only naval base in the Mediterranean. And now it also has air bases. So these are the main external forces that have been involved.
Excellent. Now, let's talk about the future. HTS, Golani. Do you think with his seemingly good relationship with the West, he has the skills, the mindset, and the sincerity to want to unite the whole of Syria, given the multi-ethnic, multi-religion, and, women, the rights of women, in a really coercive and, equitable manner?
So I think this is an important thing to watch. Jilani himself, or Ahmad al-Sharra, as he's calling it, his real name, and HTS more broadly. What are the things they're saying? What are they doing? And what do we expect in the future? So I would have been, because of his background, I would have been quite skeptical about what to expect. But as the UN envoy has said recently about HTS, up to now, he said, they've been saying and doing the right things. And I think that we should just watch carefully. I also don't agree that he has had close relations with the West. I don't believe that is the case. Western powers are now lining up to meet with him, but that's because this is the new reality. So in terms of what he's saying and what he's doing, there's been lots of talk about Syrian unity. Lots of talk about building a new nation, about reconstruction, etc. Talk, of course, is cheap, and so we have to see on the ground what happens. On the ground, one of the interesting things was after they took over Aleppo, Sharra appointed the acting governor of Aleppo. He appointed the patriarch, the archbishop. I think it was the Catholic archbishop of Aleppo as the acting governor. Okay, clearly making this point that we want a Syrian nation and not any religious or sectarian thing. On the issue of women, I mean, about 2 weeks ago, the Druze majority Druze area in the south, for their area, appointed or elected a woman as their governor. HTS approved that and accepted that she was elected, and so she's the governor. The day before that, they appointed a woman as the head of the central bank, which you can imagine is an extremely crucial job right now and moving forward. They appointed a woman because apparently she's a great economist and she knows what she's doing, I guess. And so, again, both substantially, but also in terms of the optics, making the point that, women are not going to be discriminated against because they're women. The attempts to kind of reach out to other sectarian groups, other political groups, etc., continues. Even after they took over Damascus, he then had a meeting with SDF, which is the kind of thing that clearly the Turks would be very unhappy about. But he met with them, and SDF asked him to mediate between them and the Turks, which he agreed to do. So what he's trying to do, and these talks are ongoing, is that all of these rebel groups should form part of one national Syrian army. Whether that comes to fruition or not, we wait to see, because some of those groups might say, yes, we want to be, but, feel that they might get more interests continuing to be rebels. We'll see what happens. But up to now, I think I would agree with the UN envoy. I think that they're saying the right things. What they're doing have been the right things. Certainly, we could expect that there would be some excesses here or there. But where there have been, for example, attacks on some groups of Alawis, there have been such attacks, and then the government or interim government or whatever it's called comes out with a statement saying we don't support this, etc. Okay. So I think that there are indications that it's moving in the right direction. And on the issue of the relations with the West, remember that one of the big, now everyone is talking about, one of the big obstacles for Syria moving forward is these sanctions which linger on by the United States, by European powers, etc., against Syria. And if Jolani and the HTS were actually proxies of the West, they would have lifted those sanctions and allow it to grow.
Okay, let's talk about the economy. Okay, I know that my listeners, they're already sending messages on WhatsApp. They're going to want to have questions. We're fast running out of time. 0201-277-0993, 0201-465-7190, and you can continue to send your questions, comments to 0809-597-5805. Of course, we're streaming live on YouTube, Nigeria Info 99.3 FM. I'll open the call lines in a moment. I didn't say you should call. They've already started calling. Let me ask Naeem about the economy, and then I will open up the lines. I promise you. Now, let's talk about the economy. It's, because it doesn't matter what anybody does. Without a good economy, it's bound to fall apart, because this is what poverty and hunger does, right? It pulls people apart. So the rebuilding of infrastructure and, for me, if I may self-reference, the cultural and historical assets, would they be able to do that? Where is that funding going to come from?
This is the big question. I mean, the economy is completely ravaged. The sanctions over the past few years have had a devastating effect. So, for example, they're saying now, the central bank is saying that they have $200 million in foreign reserves. In 2010, just before the uprising and the civil war, the foreign reserves were $17 billion. It's now 200 million. So you can imagine where they are. 200 million is not much for a state. A state which half of its population has been displaced over the past decade and a half. So a population of about 23 million, 13 million of that population has been displaced, about 4 million of that 13 million outside the country. And many of them we're seeing now are saying that they want to come back. The return is slow. I mean, clearly that's understandable. If I was in Turkey or in Europe as a refugee, I'd be a bit careful before I rushed back. So the return is slow, but they're all saying they want to come back. Now you have 13 million people having to be resettled. And large parts of the country that have been destroyed through the civil war that have to be rebuilt, reconstruction that has to take place, etc. So the challenges are massive,
enormous.
The World Food Program says that 13.1 million Syrians don't have enough to eat. That's of the 19 million that are there. 13.1 million don't have enough to eat. So this is huge. And I think that, the fact that the foreign minister, his first visit out of the country was to the UAE and then Qatar, etc., is part of this. They're not going to where they can make diplomatic gains. They're going to where they can interest states to put money in for reconstruction. That is, I think, after, for many Syrians, after the euphoria of the fall of Assad dies down, that will be the harsh reality, that you have to build up a state virtually from the ground up.
Of course, it's what, a month since Assad left, and yes, reality is beginning to set in. There are reports that says 90% of Syrians live in poverty. So Al-Sharaz has got a lot of work ahead of him. Right, I'm going to come to your phone lines now because I know you're impatient. Okay. Hello?
Good evening, Sisi.
Good evening. Oh, this is Emmanuel, yes.
You have Emmanuel on the line. I'm speaking to you.
Go ahead. One question, Emmanuel, because the lines are live.
First, I want to ask your guest, should the elder of 8 years have taken into cognizance that they have a radical neighbor in Israel and try to kind of protect the military assets, because immediately after the fall of Assad, it seems Syria is naked today because Israel... No,
Emmanuel, get to your question, please. We have no time.
Infrastructure. Well, should the head of 8 years, are taking into cognizance, the radical neighbors in terms of protecting the military assets? That's number one. Number two is...
Hold on, did you understand that, Naeem? Because I didn't. Did you hear that?
I didn't.
No, I didn't. Make your question very short, sharp, and succinct. Go ahead. Say it again.
The question is, at this point, he has a honeymoon. Because the early days of any administration is kind of honeymoon before it runs out, maybe in the next 4 or 5 months. What are the critical steps he should be taking now, for the future for the stability of the future?
Okay, thank you. Well, I only got the second question. I didn't really get the first question. The second question, you might need to write this down because I'll pick up more calls. The second question is, after this honeymoon period with Al-Sharaz, what are the critical things that he needs to be doing? I'll answer more calls. Hello?
Hello?
Yes, good afternoon.
Afternoon, Engineer Kundayo calling you from Ikorodu.
Go ahead, engineer.
My question to your guest,
Mm-hmm.
what's his thinking on the relationship of the new leadership in Syria with Israel, which is their arch enemy, and Iran?
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. What are your thoughts on the relationship between HTS and Israel? Let me come to the next one. Hello?
Hello?
Yes, good afternoon.
Pastor Wadamosi?
Go ahead, Pastor.
Yes, I want to ask the guest, is U.S. complicit in bringing down the former...
Assad?
Assad, yes.
Okay.
Are they complicit?
Okay, thank you. And the last one, and then I'll give you time to a couple of minutes to answer. Hello?
Hey, good evening.
Good evening. I'm very well, thank you.
You have to Titilakwe.
Go ahead, Titilakwe.
You talk about amending the constitution before the death of the senior Assad. Now, in the 90s, I think around 93, 94, the first son of Hafiz Assad died. That is the elder brother.
Yeah.
To the,
Yeah.
He died in a car accident.
Yeah.
I want to ask, was there any foul play? Does he suspect any foul play?
Okay.
That's one. Number two, now, America, in collaboration with the HTS, worked to displace ISIS in 2017 with Trump. And, Mr. Trump is coming in another 10, 12 days now. And what does he think, given the fact that the Syrian Democratic Force, being back supported by America, is going to be working against those who are the opposite of Turkey's interests. Now, Turkey, America are allies. What does he see in that area?
Okay, the relationship.
There will be clash of interest between America and Turkey.
Okay, brilliant. Well, Naeem, I bet you didn't know that we had listeners who are well versed in this. So you have 4 questions there. I'm gonna have to give you 3 minutes because the lines are going.
Okay. The critical steps forward for HTS, as I said, get money to reconstruct the country, receive refugees, resettle displaced people, build a new state, build a new army, etc. Essentially set up a state from scratch. HTS doesn't have any relationship with Israel. They have a huge challenge now with Israel bombing parts of their country and having occupied even more. So previously the Golan, but now even more. And they've called on the UN to ask Israel to leave, but they're not in a position to be able to take on another war with Israel. Is the death of Bashar's brother?
Yeah.
No one really suspects that there was foul play. Bashar really didn't want to become president. He didn't expect to be. His brother was supposed to be, and that's why they had to change the constitution for him to do so. The issue of the U.S. and Turkey and the U.S. This depends
especially
on how
in light of Donald Trump coming in as the next president.
So Trump has said that he doesn't want any part of this war. There's a possibility that he will decide to pull out American troops from Turkey, from Syria, which are supporting the SDF. That's why for the SDF, it's crucial that they make a deal in the next few weeks with HTS so that they can integrate into the Syrian new army, etc. Because if the Americans drop them, which is quite possible, they would be left open to Turkey, and that would be a big problem. Turkey is not going to attack the SDF as long as the Americans are there.
Okay. Right. We're done. Let me ask. I have a question here on WhatsApp. It says, you talked about the juries. Now, some armed factions in south of Syria, in the Juris region, refuse to hand over their weapons and join a unified national army because they do not trust the administration of al-Julani yet. What do you think about this?
So they're not refusing to give up their weapons. Rhetorically, they're saying that they will. Everyone has agreed that they will.
Okay.
But there's one or two of the smaller groups that we watch carefully, because what they're saying they will do, and the kind of holding military parades, etc., while saying we're going to give up our weapons and join, leaves some room for some concern. So it's not a certainty that they're going to take up arms against the government, but it could be possible that they might want to carve out a little area that they control themselves in a country that is very unstable at the moment.
Okay. Let's talk about the Alawites. I don't know if I'm pronouncing it correctly. So,
what, sorry?
The Alawites, Alawite in arms?
Oh, the Alawis, yes.
The Alawis, thank you. Thank you for giving my pronunciation. So let's talk about them. As we know, most of them, they're a sect, and they were harmed by the regime, and the new administration says they are individual actions. Can they present a better image than the previous, as in the new administration, than the previous regime in dealing with this sectarian strife? Are they able to manage it better?
So the Alawis, firstly, it's a minority sect in Syria, but it's the sect that the Assads come from.
Yeah.
And so in the period, the 5 decades that the two Assads have been ruling, they have, in a sense, or, the discourse now is that individuals within them, but they have been protected, they have been promoted, etc. If in the army, so... while you'd find that the majority of just because of the demographics, the majority of the soldiers in the army, the conscripts, would be from the Sunni sect, the officer corps would be mainly from the Alawi sect. So there has been lots of anger towards the Alawis because of that connection with the Assads. There's very serious attempts now, it seems, to present the view, as you just said, that the Alawis are one among many sects, and there are many. I mean, so there's the Alawis, there's Sunnis, there's Shias, there's Ismailis, there's about 3 or 4 different Christian denominations, there's Druze, etc. So there's a very strong attempt now to say that, with all of these are all Syrians, and what we need to do is create a Syrian nation. And in order to do that, there's been this way in which they're trying to embrace the Alawis. The day that they took over Damascus, I was in a conference where there was a Syrian who's from one of these towns where it's Sunni and Alawi. And the Sunnis were celebrating in the middle of the town square, and he said one of the Alawi elders came there and wanted to speak. And he said, look, we also were disadvantaged. Yes, we did bad things and we tortured people, etc. But we were forced to do so, but we are part of the same nation. And he was then embraced. So I think that there's this very deliberate kind of attempt to say that whatever your sectarian background, and whoever you might have supported in the past, we need to move forward as a Syrian nation. Hopefully that will take root, but that is the discourse at the moment.
Okay. You can still call 0201-277-0993, 0201-465-7190. Please make your questions short, precise, succinct, as quickly as possible. We have less than 10 minutes left. Now, I have another question on WhatsApp. It says, for the Jewish community who have historically maintained strong cultural ties to Syria, what do you make of Israel's recent actions?
Sorry, which community?
The Jews.
So the Jewish community in Syria is extremely small now.
The Druze community. The Druze. Yes, the Druze. Yes.
The Druze. Okay. So the Druze community spans mainly Syria and Lebanon, and they in the past decade and a half, large number of Druze have been part of the opposition, the political opposition, as well as the military opposition. When Damascus fell on the 7th of December, the first group to enter was from the south, and that was the Druze militia. So they clearly have a seat at the table. They're not viewed by anyone as being having been pro-Assad like the Alawis are by some. And I don't think that there would be any kind of a problem with them. The issue about the relationship to Israel This has been raised by some people that the Israelis have in a sense co-opted parts of the Druze community in Israel. And so, for example, Palestinians who are citizens of Israel are not allowed to serve in the army except the Druze among them. So the Druze Palestinians, and they serve in the army because they are seen as having been co-opted. So the talk is about whether the Syrian Druze will, as a result, make a deal with Israel. That possibility, of course, exists not only for the Druze but any community. But I do believe that the Syrian Druze see themselves much more as Syrian rather than that kind of agenda to ally with Israel. So I don't see that there's an immediate danger of that.
Okay. All right. You can call. I'll pick up your call if you call now. But for the moment, I have a question. Another one on WhatsApp. Considering the new Syrian administration considering the new Syrian attachment, well, it's not new, to the Golan Heights, do you consider the sentiments of him, who is him, being against Israelis? By the way, I have no idea what that question is. You'd have to rewrite it and resend. I'm coming to your calls. Hello? Hello? Hello?
Hello?
Yes, good afternoon.
Yeah, Engineer Kundayo.
Go ahead.
What's the relationship of the new leadership in Syria with Hezbollah in Lebanon and Iran?
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Is there a relationship between HTS, Hezbollah, and Iran? We didn't talk about Iran, actually. We didn't talk much about Iran. Why is Iran in all of this? Because, in this new game, if you like, that everybody's playing, Israel, we know, didn't, literally started bombing Syria, all the military bases and military assets and even non-military assets, right? Iran, on the other hand, has been quiet. One of the things that you said on your webinar was that Iran said they had warned Assad and he didn't listen of what was going to happen with HTS and Aleppo. Talk to us. 1.5 minutes.
Yes. So Iran, of course, as I said earlier, is a very important player, and so is his. And so Iran has been, for 14 years, has been fighting against HTS and the other rebel groups. But the relationship between Iran and Assad himself has not always been good. There's been a relationship of mistrust. There's also been speculation that, in the past 10 years or so, there's been numerous cases when Israel bombed in Syria, but they bombed only Iranian bases or Iranian military barracks, etc. And there's been some speculation that the locations of those Iranian assets were given to them by the Assad regime. So there's great mistrust between the two. Then they say that they warned Assad 6 months ago about what was to happen, and he said no, there's no such thing. When Aleppo was taken over and the Syrian army retreated, they warned him again. The foreign minister of Iran was in Damascus, and Assad said, no, it's a tactical retreat. And that's the point at which they then withdrew their forces, Revolutionary Guard Corps, and said, well, if you don't want our assistance, then it's the same kind of attitude of the Russians, who said, we're not going to help anyone to fight if they're not willing to fight for themselves. Both the Russians and the Iranians immediately started talking to HTS because they have interests that they want to protect. And that's why you see there's been no action taken against the Russian naval base or the Russian air base, etc. Those talks are ongoing about what will happen to those. Similarly, with Iran, there's been assurances given that the Shia community would be protected, that the Shia shrines would be protected, etc. Hezbollah is slightly different.
30 seconds, so I can fit in one more.
A great deal of unhappiness among Syrians about the role that Hezbollah played. And so I think while the relations with Iran might improve, with Hezbollah, not
likely. Okay, all right. Hello, very quickly. You have 30 seconds.
Thank you. This is the way back. You see, I want want us to rewind back to 2011. Let's assume Assad has taken he has beaten the humble pie by trying to be a gentleman like Jeenah of Tunisia, who went on exile to Saudi Arabia and allowed for peace. Does he think that his supposed successor could have been another tyrant like we have in Tunisia
right
now?
Okay. One, no, we can't do two. We have no time. Sorry, Titi Lokwe. We've literally got a minute to the end of the show, and I need to give Naim an opportunity to answer that very interesting question. What he said was, had Assad actually left, gone on exile in 2011 and not responded with such violence, which led to civil war, do you think his successor would have been somebody more democratic or another tyrant?
In 2011, Assad didn't have to leave. In fact, he had made promises of reforms. And so many of the banners in 2011 that came up called on our beloved president to put those reforms into place.
Yeah.
All he had to do was not respond with violence and actually begin reforming, and people would have kept him, and he would continue to be the beloved president.
Excellent. Naim, Jeenah, did I pronounce your name right? Is it Jeenah or Jane? It's Jeenah. Thank you, Jeenah. Thank you so very much. We are going to have you back because, as you can see, many interest in this subject.
More talk, news and sports after this.
Attention, travelers. 99.3 Nigeria Info. We are more than just radio. Subscribe to our YouTube channel at Nigeria Info FM. Check us out on Facebook at Nigeria Info 99.3. Follow us on Twitter at Nigeria Info FM and on Instagram at Nigeria Info FM Lagos for live updates as it happens. 99.3 Nigeria Info. Let's talk.